And when we first came here, and we walked into this boardroom, the first thing that we did is what nearly every single person does when they see this fantastic 4 foot by 4 foot wonderful coat of arms. The Duke of Westminster's coat of arms is on our boardroom wall.
I see 1621.
Yeah, that's how long it's been around. It's been this boardroom here is part of the overall group of rooms and within the building that's been around, as you say, since 1621. And the Duke of Westminster, the first Duke of Westminster, Thomas Grosvenor, he met a little girl, and that little girl was called Mary Davis. Now,
isn't that our street address?
That's our street address, Davis Street.
Yeah.
Central London, just Bond Street tube stop. We walk up Davis Street for about 20, 30 seconds.
Claridge is across the road.
Claridge is just on the corner. And we walk in here, and Davis Street was named after Mary Davis. Now, she was a 12-year-old girl when she first met Thomas Grosvenor, the first Duke of Westminster. And not long after that, they were married. Now, it wasn't Thomas who owned all of the wealth back then. He was obviously quite wealthy, but it was Mary Davis's family.
Right, most people would think a duke,
Yes.
would have the money.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
that's interesting.
Yeah, it was Mary Davis's family who'd inherited Mayfair, Belgravia, Chelsea, Hyde Park, St James Park, Park Lane and Pimlico. They'd inherited all of that.
I heard that, and I've heard you telling this story before, and I've heard that they were useless pieces of land outside the city walls of London because the city walls of London was the financial hub.
Chelsea was actually called Chelsea Fields, and that's what it was, Chelsea Fields. And obviously today it's probably one of the most valuable pieces of land and real estate that you can get. And so what they did, and what the first Duke of Westminster did very cleverly with the lawyers around him, they decided that they would protect it. So they took a piece of paper, literally, and placed all of that wealth into the art collections, the land, the property. They put it into a piece of paper, and that was called a trust.
So how did they do that, though? How did he get that wealth then? Because it was her wealth and her family's wealth.
That's right. And so back then there was a word that was used widely called coverture. And coverture meant that when a man married a woman, everything that the woman owned was passed to the man 100%.
Wow, that's not really PC nowadays, is it?
Can you only imagine that today?
Wow, no, not at all.
No. And so that's what happened. And the very, very astute first Duke of Westminster, who his ancestors must love with a passion, because he was the person first in their family who was the person that protected pretty much everything they still have today. So they've passed down that wealth through generations without pretty much any of it being lost in things like inheritance tax, reclaim from the government, and loss through the liabilities such as taxes.
I guess something that's really important there is to understand why that was done, because a lot of people might think it was to avoid tax, and I don't think that is the situation.
Not at all.
But there are many assets within that estate that we're aware of that, if weren't protected, could have been lost. And so the strategy of putting that into a trust for estate planning was massively important, because a story that links quite well in with that story is post First World War. A lot of the assets of families around the UK, when the First World War happened, the young men went to fight, didn't come back, and unfortunately death duties at that time, I think the number was 70%. And so families had to find 70% inheritance tax, or it was called death duties at the time.
That's right.
That wiped out estates. It wiped out treasures of this country and part of the history, because people couldn't afford to maintain them. Then normally what happened, normally we don't have wars that often, and families don't die, and generations are able to rebuild their wealth over a period of time. But what wasn't taken into consideration was that the Second World War came very, very shortly after the First, and did the same thing and wiped out another generation, which was devastating to the families. But and equally devastating was that they had to find the death duties again. The families couldn't do it. No. And so the founder of a very, very, very clever and worthwhile organisation, which we value and have enjoyed on many occasions, Michael, the National Trust,
yes,
went to these families after the Second World War and said, I understand that you've got some big death duties to pay. How about we look after those assets and treasure them? We transfer them to the National Trust, and we will look after them and will allow you to live in the West Wing or part of the property and still be able to live where your family once lived. What a fantastic strategy. You know, some things are worth preserving, and history as we see it today, there's a lot of people that want to tear down history for good reason, so I'm not here to say that they're wrong, but you can't rewrite history.
No.
And history is there to teach us about the future and what's happened previously. Some things are good and some things are not so good. So fantastic to hear about the coat of arms. Could you tell me more about those coat of arms?
Yeah,
I see some writing. I'm not a learned colleague with Latin, but there is some writing on there.
Well, the middle part is the part which you'll see on the passports of the UK, and it says "Oni soi ki mali pence," and that means shame on them who think evil of it. It all came from King Edward III, and it was all about a party. One night they had a party, and I think it was one of his relatives who was dancing. And unfortunately, and this is where the Order of the Garter came from, her garter fell down and it stuck around the bottom of her ankle, and people were laughing. And King Edward went to his relative and took the garter and put it on his own leg, and then looked around to see whether those same people were laughing. Now, don't really know too much about the sort of dynamics and the reasons why he did that, but it's a fascinating thing, and to have that now on the middle of our passports is a unusual but interesting fact. And
so just remind me again then, so what does that mean?
Oni soi ki mali pence is Latin, and it means shame on them who think evil or ill of it.
Wow, so the king really wanted to defend the lady.
He did.
And came up with that. Interesting. Okay, and the writing at the bottom.
BT Pacifi, which is the Duke of Westminster's motto, which is "Blessed are the peacemakers," which is wonderful. And I've always loved that. And it's the first thing that my eyes were drawn to first, the two words at the bottom. I think it's an amazing thing, and I've always loved it. Every single time I come into this office, and we're here very regularly, certainly weekly, if not daily, and I look at it every time and I'm fascinated by it. But I'm fascinated even more so by the story and the history behind it.